And we're live. Woo-hoo! And on today's show, we have Victor. Is it Janzen or
It's Janzen? Yeah,
Janzen?
Janzen, basically.
And it's a very topical show for those who've been watching Disney Plus's Moonlight, which he's a superhero who's got dissociative identity disorder. And Victor is unfortunate enough to be a sufferer from that for quite a while. So, well, I know you have other issues as well as DID, but can you just start off by talking about when you were when you were diagnosed with DID, and also when you probably in hindsight actually started to be affected by DID, and what DID is?
Yeah, so DID is, as the title says, dissociative identity disorder, but it's also known as multiple personalities.
Yeah.
And so, in my life, childhood, I've got certain specific areas of trauma where one or two entities have come out of that trauma in childhood. And then the other thing to really think about is with the ID, it's something that you can't just, well, from my experience anyways, you can't just call it up and all of a sudden you're a different character.
Yeah.
It doesn't work that way.
Okay, so this is from my perspective something like it's like we'll jump into a totally off-field question, but how do you know you have these different personalities? Do you suddenly wake up and find you're somewhere else, like the typical fictional portrayal of multiple personalities, or is it a case that you communicate with your other personalities? How does it work? I mean, in a realistic, or is it harder to describe than that?
Well, so put it this way, like I've got 20 personalities thereabouts. And so in this conversation, you're talking to 21 entities, including myself. And those 20 entities, they're not connected. I'm not connected to them, but they're connected to this conscious stream. So they're hearing the whole conversation. They know what's going on. And then how I find out, a lot of times, and this might sound very absurd, but my identities, one of them has or knows how to use technology. Well, two of them actually know how to use technology.
Yeah.
And no matter how many passwords I put on my computer or codes or whatnot, hiding equipment, they find it. They eventually find it. They eventually get on. They eventually send out poetry.
Yeah.
And so that's a one piece. The other piece is sometimes I'm left on my floor physically exhausted, and I don't know why.
So when's the first time you can remember being aware that something was off in terms of your personality or personalities even?
Well, the first time I realized that was when I was in the hospital. I was in an institution for a while, for a couple weeks, and I had a 3 to 4 hour conversation, I believe, with a psychiatrist and a medical doctor. And the next day, the psychiatrist saw me and started speaking to me like she knew me. I just about jumped out of my skin because I had no recollection of the 4 hour conversation we had the day before.
Yeah. So did you first think that was some sort of memory issue, or how did you work out it was a personality thing?
They found, well, they also in that time period, a couple of the other personalities came out.
Yeah. So is it like, do you think it's, I mean, from like pre-talks and seeing you on other interviews, does this derive from trauma, or is this just something that happened naturally and you're born with?
It comes from trauma. I mean, the mind, the brain. See, the brain is just a container in your head. The mind is, I think, your entire body and your environment around you. To a certain extent, is your mind. And so, when I got diagnosed, it was definitely a surprise, and knowing, like, trying to understand which character got out or which entity got out, because there's always blowback. Every time I dissociate, there's blowback somewhere,
Yeah.
and sometimes it's negative, and sometimes it's positive.
Yeah. So, I mean, you work as a project manager. So, has that job been affected by your DID at all, or
No, so essentially, so to go back in history, I've always been, and maybe this is why I have DID and why I'm so good at compartmentalizing.
yeah,
But yeah, I can compartmentalize my work day and not have any of my mental illness affect it. But as
yeah,
soon as I'm off the clock, it's anyone's game at that point.
okay. So, I mean, you were talking, and you've talked widely about night times that are difficult for you.
Yeah.
So, could you describe like a typical night as best you can? Like, how does DID affect your night times?
Sure. So usually it starts around 8 p.m. or thereafter, um, where I get to experience all my trauma. And I'm gonna give you a trigger warning here,
Okay, yeah,
because all my trauma, I get to experience it all. I get to experience the suicide attempts, the one death. I get it all at one night, and so within a 2-hour span. I'll be laying on the floor. I can feel the cold hardwood floor on one side. Yeah, I can feel the coals burning my hand on the other side. And then on the other arm, I can feel like the dirt and gravel being scratched up on my arms. And then I'm tasting sand and smelling chlorine.
hmm,
And then my eyes go all blurry. I can't see anything. So I can't rely on any of my senses. And so at that point, reality becomes lunacy, and lunacy becomes my reality.
yeah. So, I mean, you've been diagnosed. It's like 10 years now with DID.
Yep.
What, if anything, have they tried to do to help you with DID, and has it been effective? And what is your opinion in general in terms of mental health professionals and treating or helping DID people?
Yeah. So with me, they really didn't know what they had,
Yeah,
because I had multiple other mental illnesses on top of this. So it was an experiment, and I can tell you at one point I was under 40, and I was probably taking 40 pills a day.
yeah,
And one day I woke up and I realized I shouldn't be on 40 pills a day.
yeah,
But then at the same time, I was dealing with substance abuses as well. So it was always a struggle, because they would give me I had all these pills, and I have a history when I dissociate to consume as many pills as possible and mix it with alcohol. So yeah, I try my best.
yeah. So it's not really been therapy, and the rest of it has not been particularly helpful. Then, would you say that? Or
Well, the therapy part, I have a really good, like the first therapist I went to, well, she had no clue. She was
yeah,
unqualified. And then at the end, she actually took all my trauma, weaponized it, and had me hung in a court of law. So in
mm,
Canada, the message that sent me is that anyone who's mentally ill, it's a crime in Canada to be mentally ill. That's what that's what I got out of that message. So yeah, so she was unqualified, had no clue what to do with DID, even though on her webpage it says that she had dissociated parts work, which is different than DID apparently.
mm.
Anyways, and then so what I've been finding that's really helpful is equine assisted learning. So I go see horses.
Oh, okay, yeah,
I work with
yeah,
horses. That's my new tribe now. You know, Like, I mean, I have my family, but because of all my trust issues with the remainder of the world and remainder of the species, my tribe where I have 100% trust is with a herd of horses.
That's interesting, actually. I mean, how did you hear about? I've never heard about like what you call horse therapy, I suppose, or equine therapy before. How did you hear about it?
Well, ironically, my ex-therapist is heavily involved in that.
Oh, okay, yeah,
But and so was but I was fortunate enough to work with my current therapist who had a connection to someone who had equine therapy. So I have a coach, and then we do horse work. And a lot of times people think all I do is ride the horses. It's like, no,
yeah,
I work with the horses on the ground to to communicate. And then at the same time, I volunteer there to shovel the stalls and do some labor on the property too.
yeah. So, let's say there's somebody who watches this or watches the replay of this interview, and they think, maybe I've got DID. I've got time periods where I don't really know what happened, and people come back to me. How did you work out specific? I mean, I know you were in a mental institution at the time, but how could somebody tell whether it's just like memory blackouts or whether they actually possibly have got multiple personalities?
Well, that's the thing, you see, because we all dissociate here and there. Because if you think about it, even daydreaming is a form of dissociation, and dissociation is really, from my perspective, I've seen only two things come out of dissociation, and that is creativity and confusion.
Yeah,
I know that some people who daydream come out of that with the most inspired artwork you can imagine. And then I know some people who dissociate, and they end up in hospital.
yeah,
Like, I can tell you from experience. I mean, I've with all my years of substance abuse, and I haven't and to be clear, I haven't substance abuse I had a relapse last fall, but other than that, it's about 3 years now.
yeah, that's good.
And so, it's and ironically, so I had an OD, and ironically, it was my ex-therapist who called the police and got me to hospital.
Yeah,
And that's the thing, right? So the good, that's the bad side of DID. Sometimes you wake up and you have no idea what damages were done.
yeah. So, I mean, obviously you've noticed before you've got other mental disorders as well. How do you think that? Do you think they have been lessened or increased because of the DID, or do you think it's a totally separate thing? Do you think you could have DID on its own, or do you think it's always related to trauma or PTSD or something like that in another way?
I think DID is an outcome of trauma. So because I mean, its sole purpose is to fragment and segment or fragment and create segmentation of the brain or your mind so that it protects you.
Yeah. Okay. If you don't mind me asking, can we talk a little bit about your multiple personalities, so to speak?
Oh, sure.
Have you got any? Is it a case that like they all get equal time, and you're just not necessarily aware, or are some like? Is there like one or two that are come out a lot, and is it they come out in particular situations?
Yeah.
Or is that the way it works? I mean,
Yeah.
I mean, I know the trouble is you're kind of a third party person describing them as well.
Yeah.
But,
So for me, Tim, there's one or two, there's a handful that come out regularly.
yeah.
I've got one who's called Harris, and it's uppercase HARAS. He's been with me since I've been 4 years old, and I can tell you that he sends me death threats every once in a while via email.
Oh, that's a bit strange.
Well, it's a bit strange. So and it's kind of confusing because you see, I got this entity in me that has the capabilities of terminating my life.
Yeah.
And has the ability to check this person, right, this person you're speaking to out, take over, and take me out once and for all without my knowledge.
Yeah.
So I mean, that's kind of stressful sometimes, and gives you a little bit of anxiety.
I can imagine, yeah. Though presumably they probably more want to take you out rather than the whole body, by the sounds of things, or else they probably would have done it. So
Yeah, and you see, there's and with these two entities, I mean, all they've done is they've damaged this body.
yeah,
People have witnessed me trying to run through brick walls. People have witnessed this body being pegged like a tent or a tent peg into the ground head first.
oh,
Yeah, I've woken up outside in my backyard, not knowing how I got there, lying on my deck, coughing up blood, and having sore ribs. And a lot of times, what happens is I bruise all my ribs, and I think a couple times I broke a couple.
yeah,
But the thing is with DID, see, what should normally take like 6 months to heal takes me about a year or so to heal, because every time I dissociate, if the wrong entity gets out, they attack the rib that's broken,
oh,
or
okay,
they attack the weak spot.
yeah. So Harris is one of your personalities. What about any of the other? Are there more benevolent ones?
Well, it's interesting. So I have a warrior indigenous chief.
Yeah,
He comes out and has some fascinating poetry. There is one called the Poet, and he seems to be, I guess, the manager of most of the communications.
yeah,
He apparently communicates directly with my circle of care, like he knows them,
yeah,
and but it comes from my email address. But I'm like, I didn't write that. But then
yeah.
my therapist, he's like, well, you did write it because it was your hands. It was just not your consciousness.
Your main personality, yeah.
Yeah, so it's fascinating. I find it really fascinating.
Yeah, so you were saying earlier, you reckon that they've all got access. They're all like seeing this interview now, but as in like in the background.
Yep,
It's not like you think that they're waking up suddenly and thinking like, "What's going on?" I mean, obviously you can't tell because you're your personality, but you reckon that you're kind of like the main person, but you lose control, but they're always in the background. Is that the way you think it works?
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. With me, anyways, they know who I speak to. They know, because it's interesting, because some of the dissociative emails that have gone out have gone to new people that I had conversations with.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that just tells me that they're aware. They're aware of everything I do.
Yeah, it's unusual, isn't it? I mean,
Yeah.
it's you'd think that. I mean, the typical representation in fiction is that you have one personality comes in, but he doesn't know what the other one's done, and it's. But from what you're saying, it's like you've got your main personality, but you can't remember anything they do, but they're always aware of what you're doing,
Yep.
which is interesting. And why do you think they? I mean, you're saying you give them are those names that they've given themselves, or they're names that you've given them?
They're
Separately.
most of them are names for the older ones. They're
Yeah.
names given to me by them.
Oh, okay.
For the younger ones, because my suicide and a lot of my trauma happened early on, it's just there's just different versions of a child like Victor.
Oh, okay. So this mostly does it? Do you think they all originated at the right same time, or are they?
No, no.
Have you seen new ones appear since you've been aware your
Yeah,
DID?
yeah. When I'll tell you, when I died, I drowned in a pool.
Yeah.
Um, and I had this vision of being free, and I was at Little Bighorn, sitting with the elders, smoking a peace pipe, sitting bull, you name it, they were all there, Crazy Horse. And next thing I know, I got this sharp pain in my chest, and I came back to this reality, and ever since then, this Indian indigenous warrior chief appeared.
Yeah.
And so he makes his appearance ever so often, but now most of them all speak through the poet and get their message out.
So are you from Native American heritage then, or is this just because it's interesting how you think a lot of the kind of the historical stuff about exorcism and people speaking in tongues and all the rest of it, a lot of that could be DID in the past.
Yeah.
But it's interesting how you've got this Native American sort of chief in there, even though you're not necessarily from that background.
Yeah.
Do you think that these are the personalities are being subconsciously created within your brain, or do you think it's more? Do you think there's an external element? I'm getting a bit spiritual here, but do you think they are external, or do you think it is just something that your brain is creating as kind of a defense mechanism against something?
I think it's my because of my upbringing. I really think it's my mind protecting this version of conscious self.
Yeah,
because I didn't grow up in a lovey-dovey family at all.
Yeah, I mean, I can kind of imagine that. I mean, as far as you can, without going into too much graphic detail, what was your upbringing like? And I get the feeling, and I've seen you in other interviews talk about this, but I get the feeling that your upbringing is a large chunk about where your DID came from.
Yeah, I mean, it was basically just a violent upbringing. You know, and I was told I was the mistake, but they still loved me, and that was an ongoing theme, I suppose, since I've been 4 years old.
Yeah.
So you hear that enough times, and then you think you're worthless.
Yeah.
And and they ingrained a lot of shame in me.
Yeah.
And then that just got perpetuated when I reached out for help and ended up getting punished and hung in court.
Oh, okay.
That just brought out more shame.
Yeah. So this is all like so there's a set of specific events that basically cause most of these personalities.
Correct.
Trauma events, I guess.
Yeah.
Do you also suffer from PTSD, presumably?
Correct. Yeah. Complex PTSD.
Yeah. So have you found if somebody was watching this video, I asked this question before, but I'm not sure I got the answer I wanted, so I'm going to ask it again. But somebody watching this video and they're thinking, well, maybe I have might have DID. What should they be doing? What kind of things would be helpful for somebody who thought they might be suffering from something like this?
Well, and this is the thing. Studies have shown that DID is quite rare. It's like 1% of, I think, 1 million, I guess, or something like that. Or it's a high number. It's 1% and a high number.
Yeah.
But yeah, if anyone thinks they have DID, I guess you can speak to your local doctor and get it and get tested. There are some tests that could rule out other things that might then point you to DID as a diagnosis.
Yeah. I mean, in some ways you're an example because you do hold down a regular job, and you are able to communicate with people, and to some extent to manage the DID. Are you on any particular medication at the moment for this? Is there any medication that's helpful, or have you moved away from the 40 pills? Because that just sounded a bit excessive.
Yeah. So I ended up with medical supervision, got off all the pills.
Yeah.
And got rid of the fog that was in my head, and found out that I need a couple pills because of all the damage all the medication did to my internals.
Yeah.
Now I have medication for that.
Yeah.
But yeah, a lot of it, cutting off a lot of those meds, because a lot of those meds, I believe actually amplified the urges to substance abuse. that's how I look at it. And so, yeah. So I mean, I'm on regular meds now, and besides Thanksgiving last year, like I said, knock on wood, it's been 3 years of taking meds properly without abusing them.
Yeah, and presumably alcohol and various other illicit substances are not a good idea for somebody with DID.
No, not a good idea.
And does it actually? I mean, does alcohol? How does that bring out the other personalities, or does it just make it harder to work out what's going on?
No, I found that alcohol doesn't bring out different personalities. I look at it this way. Sometimes my mind thinks, okay, if I keep myself sedated,
Yeah,
the DIDs won't come out because I'll be too drunk for them to come
yeah,
out. And that worked, and I think that's what kept driving the substance abuse problem is being intoxicated all the time, so that, and all I was doing was I was just suppressing what was already there.
yeah. And like, come on, do you think there are any positives that you've got from suffering from DID? I know it's probably a hard question.
Absolutely.
Oh, okay.
The biggest positive is I get to read poetry that my hands have written, but my mind hasn't.
Yeah.
And because I have, so what happens is poetry gets written, it gets sent out, and then my doctor will get it, or my psychotherapist will get it, and or someone on my team will get it, and then they send it back to me. And here I'm trying to find the poem, the last one that just came in. And I'd like to read it to you if I could.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so this comes from the poet, and it was written on the 28th at around 11:40 p.m. and it was called Blackbirds.
Yeah.
Do you see all those parts of me spread about within this consciousness? It takes quite a bit to lose your head as the blackbird sings such harmonic melodies. Can't you see? Oh, can't you see what they're doing to me? Like the winds carrying away their songs, free spirits on the tails of the eastern wind. Can you see all the parts of me spread across this unconsciousness? There's a lot going on, so step on through the thresholds. It's quite a way to lose your head within his uncomfortable consciousness, the poet.
Yeah.
So I get to read stuff like that.
Yeah.
And so to me, that is, I think, the biggest positive, because these entities now are finding ways to express themselves
Creatively, yeah.
Yeah, creatively, and not trying to put my body through a brick wall.
Yeah. I mean, I can imagine. So is that your hope that the other personalities can find constructive ways to kind of engage?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
cut down on the destructive side. I mean, there are probably people who suffer from DID who just had it purely in a positive way.
Yeah, exactly.
They never would be diagnosed with like. So.
Yeah, and that's the thing, right? Because there's so many variables involved in the human body, your environment. Like there's so many variables that it's really hard to nail down. Well, this is what DID is. Put a parameter around it.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I want everyone to know is that we're not all animals. We're not all monsters.
Yeah.
Like Hollywood likes to portray us. And on that note, it's I think, and I struggle with this, and I'm trying to come to terms with it. I think having DID because of the poetry is a blessing in disguise.
Yeah. Okay. So if people want to find out more about you, or maybe the poetry, or want to just chat to you about DID, how can they get in touch with you?
Primarily on Twitter.
Yeah.
It's at Victor Janzen, and it's VictorJanzen.
Yeah.
That's where I typically hang out.
Okay. Well, it's been great to have you on the show, and it's been great to learn about DID.
Thank you for having me.
Okay. Goodbye. Thanks for everybody who's been watching.
This is terrifying for me.
I've made more money in the last 3 years than I did in the previous 7.